rest easy, always shine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Amrita Goswami. Really, sir was very vibrant with his very beautiful smile. Today, we also miss sir very much a lot. Now, may I request Gayatri Hazarika, research scholar, to introduce today's chief guest come speaker, Professor Stuart Richard Milligan. Over to you, Gayatri.
Thank you, ma'am. I take this opportunity and as well as privilege to introduce the chief guest and speaker for today's memorial lecture, who's none other than Professor Stuart Richard Milligan, who's presently the visiting professor of reproductive biology in King's College London, University of London. His first degree in zoology was in 1971 from Oxford University, and then a DPhil, which is equivalent to PhD in reproductive biology from Oxford University in 1974. Later, he went on to serve as a lecturer from 1975 to 91, senior lecturer in physiology from 91 to 2002, and as a professor of reproductive biology in 2002 to 2008 in the very prestigious Institute of King's College of London. He has been an author to several books and published innumerable research articles in various journals. He was the supervisor of Professor J.C. Kalita during his PhD days in King's College. We are indeed very fortunate to have Professor Stuart Richard Milligan with us today. I request him to kindly deliver his talk. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I have to switch off my camera just for a minute, and then hopefully I can share my talk with you. So just bear with me. My camera is going off. I'm trying to share my screen. And hopefully,
yeah,
you have my screens, and hopefully you can see me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me say to begin with, thank you so much for inviting me to give this lecture. Having heard, I met Professor Goswami once in 2005 when I came over to you, and having heard his resumes today, I feel deeply honoured to give this talk, and I hope I can do him justice. I actually changed the title after I was first asked. The title I gave was The Many Powerful Pressures of Pollution, but the more I thought about it, I've added a couple more words in, which is, and challenges, because it's the biggest problem which the world is facing, it's the biggest problem that biology is facing. And I've got this quote from Jacques Cousteau, who Professor Goswami will certainly have probably seen his books and his television programs and his film, because Jacques Cousteau was also somebody who was very interested in the aquatic environment. He was the first man who really introduced what was happening underneath the water to the global audience. But he had this quote as well: "Water and air, the two essential fluids on which life depends, have become global garbage cans." And I'd like to sort of expand on that today with a brief talk. One of Cousteau's books and one of his films was called The Silent World, and that's very appropriate to actually talking about pollution, because pollution is also silent. But we can see it sometimes. If I ask you to think of a picture of pollution, many of you will come up with different thoughts in your mind. Here's one, and it's a worldwide problem, highlighted actually by the COVID-19 epidemic, because many of us saw clear skies again when the pollution caused by traffic and air traffic disappeared. And it's extraordinarily serious. The WHO estimated in 2018 that almost 90% of children were living in places where outdoor air pollution exceeded the limits. And that was causing 1 in 4 childhood deaths under the age of 5. Thinking about pollution, some of you may have thought, oh, no, sorry, I forgot this one. And it's relevant because Professor Kalita on Facebook, I think a couple of days ago now, put this up, complaining about the local pollution caused by the polluting traffic. And it isn't just happening in India, it's happening everywhere. If you're thinking about pollution, some of you would probably think of something like this: the enormous amounts of pollution, waste, which is just accumulating. Some of you might think of something like this, which is a very emotive picture of a turtle trapped in plastic waste, which is in this case a fishing net, on the ocean beds. It's something, this is one of the pressures of pollution. It's disturbing pressures, it's emotional. And the only good thing about that is that it does stir our emotions, and it does sort of make us think, well, what are we going to do about it? But we have a problem. The problem is that humans have always had, and I suspect will continue to have, a tendency to turn a blind eye to things we do not like. Turn the other way, we don't see it, it's gone away. And especially with pollution, because often it does go away. It floats down the river, it goes somewhere else, it blows away. There's also another problem with humans, and again, it's worldwide. We tend to have a very optimistic view of the future. Why do we have an optimistic view of the future? Well, because we've solved so many problems. In the past, we've had many problems facing us, and we've solved them. We've solved them with technology often. And over the last many, many years, living standards generally have tended to increase across all parts of the globe. And this sort of vision of the future with clear blue skies and just no traffic, few trains, we sort of think this is somehow we're going to get there. And so this optimistic view about how we got here, it'll just keep on going. And I'm afraid I'm going to try and dispel that today. So my question is really, how have we got where we are, and where are we going now? And let's have a look at how we've got, well, where we've got to now. This is the world's population of the last 12,000 years. Population up on this axis. Here's 10,000 years before, the BCE is before the current era. And this is north, this is 2000, so we're up here now. And if we look at the world's population, 4 million back then. By the time we reached the 1700s, 600 million people, but still very low. Let me add to that. Okay, by 1950, why 1950? Well, there were, for me and you, actually, two significant events now. My birthday happened to be in 1950, the same as Professor Goswami's. We were of the same age. And the world we were born into is very different from the world we live in now. Then there were just about 2.5 billion people, significantly more than there were a few hundred years earlier, but 2.5 billion. And we got to this point because of a load of technical changes, industrial revolution, agricultural changes, which allowed much more greater production of food, and better health. Better health for us, better health for animals, because of cleaner water supplies, vaccines and antiseptics. This was 1950. Where are we now? From the 1950s, we had synthetic materials being developed in large quantities, things like plastics, pesticides, fungicides, antibiotics. But look at the population. 1950, 2.5 billion. Today, it's something like 7.8, 7.9 billion. It's gone up threefold in my lifetime. It's a different world. And that's another pressure on pollution. It just comes from the sheer numbers of people on the planet. If we look at the sheer numbers of people on the planet, then if we put them in perspective of everything else, then in fact we're actually very small. Humans just make up 0.01% of the Earth's total biomass. Most of it's plants. There's a large numbers of bacteria, and we'll say more about bacteria in a minute. 5% of everything else. We're just a tiny, tiny proportion. So why are we worried about the numbers of humans? We're worried because of this. This comes from a paper, came out last year, Global Human-Made Mass Exceeds All Living Biomass. This is the biomass on the planet today. Animals, 4 gigatons, that's 4,000 million tons. Trees and shrubs, 900 gigatons. That's what's living. What's humans done? The total amount of plastic we've made, and most, and it's been in the last 50, 60, 70 years we've made this plastic, and it's still all around today, or 95% of it is, 8 gigatons, twice as much plastic, which is sticking around, than the current biomass of animals. This one, buildings and infrastructure, roadways, huge amounts, exceeding the total current biomass of plants. We've changed the world by dominating them with things that by dominating the whole planet by what we've done. And one of the problems is this: when you start doing these things, when you start buildings, when you start making things, when you start having new technology, you produce waste. And that waste, to begin with, is not a problem. It's not a problem because when you first start doing things, there's not much of it. If you do it a few hundred years ago, there weren't many people anyway. So frankly, you could ignore the waste and it just out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't matter. But because of the sheer population pressures, what's happened is that waste has accumulated. It's built up. And now we see it as pollution. And that pollution is not just current day pollution, it's a historical backlog of pollution caused by all the things we've been doing over the last 100, 50, 20, 10, yesterday. All that time, there's a historical backlog which is building up. Okay, so I want to say something about 3 aspects of pollution. I've carefully selected them. I hope it's going to work. But in terms of when you think about pollution and you try and think about, well, what can you do about it? The kind of picture that you need to build up is really this. This is just an idyllic picture of the planet, the surface of the planet, where we've got humans and animals living up here and plants. We're doing various things, producing things. We're producing some waste over here. And then we've got an aquatic system with lots of things living in it. And we need to think about pollution. When we think about pollution, what are we going to think of? Well, first of all, first question is, where's it coming from? The second question is, what are the pathways where it's taken anywhere else? Then when it's taken somewhere else, what are the targets? What's it going to hit? And the fourth thing is, what are the consequences? And if you want to tackle pollution, then these are really the 4 things you've got to look at. The consequences we often see, and then we start thinking, what are the sources? What are the pathways? What are the targets? This is obviously often the first thing. If we can look ahead, we can predict some of these things. But often humans turn a blind eye. They think, okay, let's just wait and see. I want to tackle this from 3 different perspectives. Oops, sorry, I've missed that one. There's another problem and pressure here, and in fact illustrated by this diagram, and that is things go into the air, get diluted, they go into the weather systems, they cross national boundaries. So what happens to it? Who's going to deal with it? Whose pollution is it? Whose responsibility is it? And because of that, the pressures become both political and global. The three aspects I want to deal with are three different aspects associated with this, that waste is complex. A complete mixture of different things, from solid waste, as you can see. The first one I want to deal with is actually CO2. And CO2 is actually reflected not in this, but actually in these power lines, because we know that we generate a lot of CO2 by generating power. And it should be fairly simple to think about this one, because it's a single molecule. It's a simple molecule. We do have massive amounts of it, and it affects physical systems. The next thing I want to deal with after that is something very different, but another chemical. You can't see CO2, you can't see antibiotics, but they're natural, largely natural compounds, which are much smaller amounts. They have biological effects. Why are those posing a problem? And the third one, which I hope I've got time for, is this one, is synthetic chemicals, which are really an expansion of antibiotics in terms of there are many of these produced in large amounts with many biological effects. So I want to try and compare and contrast these in terms of pollution and where we're going. Okay, an easy one, CO2. Why is it easy? Well, because if we look at the source, the pathways, the targets and consequences, we can identify all of these quite easily. The source. I've taken this data from the latest I could find for India, but in fact it would be a very similar but bigger picture for any other, for the globe, but very similar to almost any other country. Annual fossil CO2 emissions for India, largely coming from coal or from oil, some from gas, and some from cement. Building. We know the sources, very well defined. I'll just point out here that they'd only really start taking off properly from 1950, early the 1950s onwards. 1950 is really a significant time for how the world changed. The pathways. We know the pathways. You produce CO2 by burning fossil fuels or by making cement. The sources are easy. Pathways, yeah, it goes into the atmosphere. So here we've got two things, CO2 in the atmosphere, which are these levels, in the pinky orange, at least it's pinky orange for me, I'm colorblind, so I think that's what it is. Some of you may say it in an entirely different color. And these are the CO2 emissions. And again, look, here's 1950. This is when things are taking off. And if we look at CO2 in the atmosphere, then pre-industrial levels were down here somewhere, 280 parts per million. They've doubled now. They've doubled. And they've doubled really, most of that's happened in the last 150 years or so. So we know the sources, we know the pathways, we know the targets, the consequences. The consequences are clear. The consequences are clear, and I sort of combine things together. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It's a physical response to radiation. It changes the CO2 molecule, it vibrates, it re-emits the radiation, it's trapped within the atmosphere. We've known about this trapping from 1824. And really by the end of the 1800s, the whole concept about global warming and how the atmosphere was trapping heat was established. It wasn't, though, really until the 1970s that people began to worry about it in significant amounts. Why? Because the consequences were becoming more and more obvious. So this is global temperature rise since 1850. But again, from 1950 onwards, it's shooting up. And so here we are. This is the mean temperature from the change in mean temperature from pre-industrial levels north. It's gone up 1.2 degrees by now. And the Paris Climate Agreement said we should only go up to 1.5. We should try and limit it. We know the consequence is not just temperature, it's the whole of climate. Climate change is happening. There's no doubt. What do we do about it? So the solution. The solutions. Well, they should be simple. You can do a number of things. One is you could try removing the CO2 from the atmosphere. That would be good because you'd bring down the CO2 levels, you take away that greenhouse effect, and you could revert things back to normal. There's a technical problem here because it's so low in percentage in terms of the atmosphere. It's only 0.04%. Technically, it's possible. And in fact, there was news in the UK yesterday that they were trying to set up a plant in Scotland to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and essentially make it into a solid form and shove it back into the discarded oil wells. Yes, that'll work. Will it deal with this problem? No. It's too big. How else can you remove the CO2? Well, there's a biological system which is remarkably efficient at doing it. Plants use CO2. They can take, and it's always been a remarkable thing, which I'm not sure if biologists really take on board enough, that plants can take something which is very, very, very small in terms of percentage in the atmosphere and trap it into something useful. Trap it into wood, trap it into food, and trap it into carbon deposits, which we could use. So removing CO2 is one thing, but takes a lot. The obvious thing is to cut emissions. But cutting emissions, how are you going to do that? You've got to change the energy source. Rather than burning fossil fuels, you've got to get your energy from somewhere else. Then you can get away or stop burning the fossil fuels. And you can also change lifestyles. If you change your lifestyle, or the world changes its lifestyle, they can cut the demand for energy, cut emissions. The trouble is with cutting emissions, whatever you produce, it goes into the atmosphere. And when it's there, there are various estimates of what CO2 half-life in the atmosphere is. Middle of the road estimate would be 30 years. It's got a fairly long half-life. So if you start cutting CO2 emissions, it takes a long time for CO2 actually to drop naturally. So in terms of climate change, we've got this is the real problem, the scale of it. There's a historical scale, there's a current scale driven by the world's population. It's a global problem, it's not limited to one country, and whatever you produce goes globally. To do something about it, you have to have a massive change in technology, and changes in technology are expensive. And as soon as you get something that's expensive, you bring in more political pressures or challenges or resistance as well. And because of political pressures or not, that has personal impacts. And changing lifestyle is also, it's a challenge to people. People are quite happy to maintain the status quo, but to change the status quo and reduce consumption is a very difficult challenge. Now, I can illustrate that by two things. One is, it came out today, it came out this morning, so you can't complain this lecture's not up to date. A draft report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It hasn't been officially published yet, but this has been a leak of the draft report, which says this: even if we meet the Paris target of keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees centigrade, that's an increase over pre-industrial levels, conditions will change beyond many organisms' ability to adapt. That is hitting the whole biological system of the planet. And we have no idea when that starts to happen, how really the planet's going to respond. They go on to say, on current trends, this target of 1.5 degrees is not going to be met. It's nowhere near going to be met. We're already near it now. On current trends, we're heading to break 3 degrees centigrade with irreversible consequences. And another of their quotes, the worst is yet to come, affecting our children's and grandchildren's lives much more than our own. These are intelligent people looking forward, saying, look, we know where we come from, we know what the causes are, where are we heading? Disaster. Why are we heading to disaster? Because of this. They also, that wasn't the final thing, but the final quote I took off, we need transformational change operating at all levels in society. Transformational change of how we work. Are we likely to get there? Well, this was taken yesterday off the BBC website in the UK, where our own UK Climate Change Committee says, no way. The gulf between the Prime Minister's promises and action on climate change is huge. UK Climate Change Committee says inadequate policies and poor implementation. That is currently. This is in a well-off society. We're not doing it. At current progress, only 20% of the UK's ambitions up to 2035 will be achieved. And critical to this is the public hasn't really been engaged. And this has been a failure for the UK with COVID as well. The public has responded, but the politicians here really haven't engaged the public sufficiently to get them on side. And to make any changes in society, you have to get the public engaged with politics to really achieve what you want. Right, that's the first part done. Second part, I said I was going to deal with three things. First was CO2, which was easy. The second is antibiotics. And I've taken this from this title from the Times of India in May 2021. Threat of Indians getting resistant to antibiotics. The title should be just the threat of the globe getting resistant to antibiotics. This is a worldwide problem, and I'll explain why with some references, I hope, to India. The discovery of antibiotics, it wasn't even 100 years ago. Alexander Fleming in 1928 really discovered the first antibiotic. He was looking at a petri dish in his lab or on his windowsill, where he was looking at the bacteria growing, which is this streaky stuff, and he noticed that bacterial growth stopped around this growth of fungus, which was really shouldn't have been there, but it happened to have got in, it grew, and he said, well, what's happening there? And penicillin was identified as the stuff which inhibited the growth. And that paved the way to thinking about, are there other things which can inhibit bacterial growth? And yeah, many of them. Antibiotics, sometimes said to be the greatest discovery of modern medicine in the 20th century, because they target bacteria and hit diseases which we could never possibly have dealt with otherwise. If we look at the deployment of antibiotics over since 1930 up to, well, this is 2005, we can see the whole numbers have come in over that time, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But bacteria are not stupid. Well, that's the wrong way of looking at it. The biology of bacteria is not stupid because they built up antibiotic resistance, and they built it up very quickly. Within 10 or 15 years, here's penicillin. Really started being employed in the beginning of the Second World War, or during the Second World War. Within a few years, there was antibiotic resistance. And the same applies to most of these. Antibiotic resistance are built up. Bacteria respond. Bacteria evolve to respond and be resistant to it. Why? Why? Let me just give you an example. This is from 2000 and, so I can't actually see my own, 2019 data from India. This particular bacterium, which is a natural bacterium which exists in the gut, but when it goes somewhere else in the body, it causes a lot of problems, a lot of illnesses. We can see how antibiotic resistance, how the bacteria has got antibiotic resistance to a wide range of antibiotics. Each of these lines is a different antibiotic. Some it's almost 100% resistant, others not so much, but it's been building up. And why do we have antibiotic resistance? It builds up because of basic biology and natural selection. Here we have some bacteria, a population of bacteria, and a couple of them happen to be resistant, just naturally, because you have mutations and they happen to be resistant to these antibiotics. Now, that's fine until you apply the antibiotics. As soon as you apply the antibiotics, you wipe out most of them, most of the bacteria. So all the yellow ones disappear, and you're left with predominantly the red ones, which are not knocked out by the antibiotics. The multiplication of the yellow ones doesn't go ahead because the antibiotics are still hitting them, but the red ones are resistant to bacteria, resistant to antibiotics, and can go on causing the disease. But it isn't just that these particular bacteria are resistant to the antibiotics. Bacteria are very good because they can, or very clever, well, the biology of bacteria is very clever because they can transfer antibiotic resistant genes between them to other species of bacteria. So not only have we got a population of bacteria here which are now antibiotic resistant, but they can transfer some of their genes to other bacteria and make them antibiotic resistant too. Now, let's put this into a real life situation. And I've put this quote, the source of this diagram, I thought it was a very nice diagram. And in fact, I've taken some of the data I'm going to use in a minute from this particular paper, came out in 2018, and it was dealing with antibiotic resistance in India, particularly in relation to dairy animals. I'm going to hide that reference now because I want to add to this particular picture. Okay, so what we've got is up here, we've got a load of antibiotics, and what we want to use them for is specific treatment of what? Of humans, for specific diseases, and for veterinary medicine for treating livestock for specific problems. Fine, that's not a problem. What is a problem is this: inappropriate and overprescription. Too much antibiotic over too long a time. It causes that natural selection of antibiotic resistance to build up. So exactly the same in livestock, but much more so actually. In many countries, it's now been banned in the UK and the States, I think, largely, and it's been resisted in India. Inappropriate use of antibiotics because they also can promote growth. And growth promotion, excuse me, growth promotion is highly valuable because if you can get faster growth, then you can get more money from your livestock. Estimate was in Punjab, 66% of chicken farms in 2014. I tried to find the data, I don't know what it is now, were using antibiotics as growth promoters. So what we were doing is vast amounts of antibiotics were being used for livestock, promoting, of course, antibiotic resistant bacteria, because a lot of it is not only bacteria, not only just building up within the animals or within humans because of the inappropriate prescription, but a lot of the antibiotics were excreted unchanged in the urine and feces. Vast amounts of them, half or more, up to 90% for tetracycline, goes out into the feces. And what happens then? It goes into water channels, it goes into manure, the manure is put back on the land goes back to the farm animals, or it goes into, directly or indirectly, the food supply. How much is in manure? Vast amounts of antibiotic-treated animals. This is micrograms per kilo. Vast amounts of these antibiotics building up in manure, just being disposed of within the environment. And the trouble is, having got it out into the environment, then the half-lives of antibiotics can be very long. Sometimes they disappear just within a few days, but they can, some of them can survive many years. So by giving too much up here, we are promoting antibacterial resistance and the build-up of antibacterial antibiotic resistant genes. And that's enhanced because of this poor sanitation, which is worldwide, inefficient wastewater treatment plants, and the feedback here of polluted water into both the agricultural system and to the human system. So we're sort of dominating the environment because of what we wanted up here, which was very specific treatment of diseases, which is good, but because of lax use of them and not even thinking about really what's happening to them, we're building up antibiotic resistance, which is going to affect our own health profiles and efficiency of agriculture, and what is happening in terms of the environment itself. And I want to go on here because this is what is poorly thought out, and I just want to bring your attention to it. Okay, hopefully you got me back on screen. So this is essentially what I've said so far, that we've been looking at antibiotic sources, pathways, targets, and consequences, specific treatment and mass medication of people, livestock mass medication. I've included fish here, and Professor Goswami would have been pleased, I hope, about this, because aquaculture is a very prominent feature of the developing world. And a lot of waste actually from humans and livestock actually goes into the use of feeding fish. And because of the easy way to treat fish, if you have problems in the fish population, is you can mass medicate them if you have a bacterial infection. A lot of antibiotics are used directly on fish. But you're having this problem with build-up within the little system here of antibiotic-resistant bacteria and antibiotic-resistant genes. I said I wanted to take it further. Here we are. I'm taking it further because we're pushing them out into the environment. We're pushing them out into the environment, and we sort of thinking, well, that's it, they've gone away. No, they haven't. What's happening to them in the environment? Let's think about antibiotics in the environment. And let's think about the sources, pathways, and targets and consequences of antibiotics in the environment. Because the sources up here were essentially human-derived sources, which we've made, exploited, manufactured. But there are antibiotics within the natural world. Most antibiotics are actually natural products. They're formed by a whole load of other things, bacteria, fungi. There are a few synthetic ones, some of which are based on bacterial and fungal antibiotics. But antibiotics are natural products produced by bacteria and fungi. So they're there anyway. What are they doing there? Well, they're not there just for our pleasure to take and use to kill specific diseases. No, in the natural world, they're having a function. Why do microorganisms produce antibiotics? They do it because they use them as signals. They use them as signals between their own species and between their species and other species. So they're natural inter- and intraspecific signal molecules, controlling many things. Physiological levels of these natural antibiotics control metabolism, reproduction, motility, everything that bacteria and fungi do. Controlled by natural biotics in the outside world, and physiological levels of natural biotics, sublethal levels. What humans have done is say, okay, let's take that. Let's take those high concentrations, those substances, put them in high concentrations, and you overwhelm the natural processes, you make them lethal, and here we have our human antibiotics. This puts a different perspective on things, because what we're doing is we're then releasing antibiotics back into the environment through the pathways I showed earlier. We're introducing antibiotics, antibiotic bacteria, and antibiotic-resistant genes back into the environment, which are going to perturb these processes, perturb them or stop them. So here we are. The antibiotics are coming down here. What are they going to perturb? They're going to perturb lots of microbiome signaling. The microbiome is really the sum total of the small bacteria fungal environment, which is critical to normal soil health, plant health, and the aquatic health as well. You're going to at least put pressures on it. You're likely to disturb it. And you're going to likely disturb the microbiome of other animals. Only in recent years have we realized that our own bacteria contribute to our own health and to our disease, but we need a very healthy microbiome within us to survive. If we disturb that, we can become ill. It's exactly the same in other animals, and they're not very nice. Bees have their own very specific microbiome, which, if you disturb it, if they're exposed to antibiotics, can disturb or kill them. So what we're likely to be doing, by releasing antibiotic-resistant bacteria and antibiotic-resistant genes, we're likely to have a whole range of really unforeseen, ill-thought-out, and unknown consequences in terms of disturbances of microbial food webs, the ecosystems. We know bacteria are essential in biogeochemical cycles, changing how gases and other things are released or incorporated into soil. So, having started up here, where we had a very clear specific treatment for specific diseases, because of our poor handling of really this whole process of what we're doing with them, of our pollutants, we've turned a blind eye to it, we haven't thought about it, and now we're going to have to do catch up to find out what's really happening. And we're going to have a catch up back here somehow. How are we going to do that catch up? The obvious one is reduce use. So you stop mass medication, you stop growth promotion, much more targeted use. You reduce the need for them by reducing infections, and you have things like immunizations for alternative treatment strategies. Possible, yes, and certainly to India's credit, here in 2017, they produced an action plan on trying to deal with antimicrobial resistance within India. 6 strategic priorities, many of them, this is the key one, reducing the incidence of infection, by infection prevention, optimizing the use of antimicrobial agents in health, animals and food. Others, that's a very key one. Others are more, how can I say it, vague, I think. And this is a common problem with when politics and science and policies interact. There's often a lot of words put forward without actual movement in terms of the key issues. This is the key issue. This is the thing that has to be focused on. And I think really my recommendation would be that should have been first. This is now going to be very brief. And I just wanted to end on this because I just want to expand it. We've done a very simple molecule, CO2. We've done a targeted set of chemicals in small amounts, which are the antibiotics. I want to end with synthetic chemicals because they pose a sort of an extension of the challenges. If we consider this, how many years have synthetic chemicals been around, and let's put them in perspective of how long the planet's been here, how long life's been here, how long multicellular life's been here. And if we had more time, I would actually pause here and get you all to write down how long's the planet been here. Think about it, think of a number, how many thousands of years, millions of years. How about life? How about multicellular? We haven't got time for that, so I'm going to fill in the answers. 4.5 billion years. Life's probably about 3.5 billion years. Billion years. Multicellular life, probably 1 billion years. Multicellular life. Cells sticking together, communicating with each other. Modern humans, nothing. 200,000 years. Synthetic chemicals, really, again, since 1950, in large amounts, 70 years or so. What kind of synthetic chemicals? You name them, they're there. An obvious one is plastics, but a whole range of others: flame retardants, heat stabilizers, pigments, lubricants, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, pharmaceuticals, non-stick compounds. In the last 70 years, we've suddenly introduced these into life forms which have been evolving for 3.5 billion years. And we said, here are life forms, 70 years, deal with them. And it's difficult. Let me give you an example. Plastics. Plastics are good, as an example here, because they're easily visible. Plastics are enormously useful. They support our lifestyles. Plastics, why? Because they're light, they're strong, they're durable, they're very cheap, they're very low in electrical and heat conductance, so we can use them as insulators. They're easy to work with because you can just heat them up a bit and bend them, low maintenance. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And look at the production of them. Enormous production, again, since the 1950s. And it's going up and up and up. And the forecast is it'll go on going up and up and up. The good thing from this lecture in terms of plastics and pollution is you can see it. What I want you to do when you leave this lecture is to go out, next time you see a piece of plastic as a pollutant, something lying on the street in a waterway, think it's not just plastic. It's got lots of additives. It's got lots of additives which are synthetic chemicals. It's got the pigments. It's got the plasticizers. It's got antioxidants. It's got antimicrobials. You've got many of the list I just gave you will be included in the plastic. And where you see plastic, what you don't see, but what's there, are additives. And you may not see them either because they may already have leached out into that waterway and gone on down into the aquatic ecosystem or into the soil. So here are synthetic chemicals, been around just for 70 years or so. The trouble is with them, they're very stable, many of them, which is fine. That's what we want for them. You don't want something to break down immediately because it loses its use. Because of that, though, they're very persistent. They persist in the environment. They persist in plastic. Many of them are lipophilic as well. That is, they bind to things like plastic. They bind to fat. And because they bind to fat, they bioaccumulate in organisms over time. So the more a fish or a cow or you are exposed to one of these things, if it can bioaccumulate in your fat, it doesn't go away. Every time you're exposed to a bit more, it'll add to it. So that bioaccumulates within specific organisms. And then it biomagnifies up the food chain. So if one thing eats another thing, it doesn't disappear, it goes into their fat and builds up. And the problem is that some, not all, but many, can interfere with biological systems. They interfere by interfering with critical cell signaling systems. Things going on within the cell which tell it what to do, or things going on between cells which tell it what to do, or things happening within our body which tell one part of the body what to do in relation to another, hormones. And they affect our development, differentiation, metabolism, and reproduction. They're called endocrine disruptors. And many of these, not all, but some, are endocrine disrupting compounds which can affect our system and all life forms as well. So that is the problem. And it's a problem which is not going to go away. I've called it a biological problem because pollution is a biological problem because that's how I see it, because it's caused by us. We're a very intelligent species who can do very stupid things. It's not going to go away. Yes, you can turn a blind eye to it. Yes, you can throw your rubbish in the bin and hope that somebody else deals with the problem. But the problem is still there. The problem is still yours. And what I'd really like is to people just to think about this. Next time you do it, What are you throwing out? Just what is it? What's in it? Are there heavy metals there? Are there chemicals there? Are there something which I didn't need to throw out? Where's it going? Who's going to deal with it? Is somebody going to deal with it? Or do you just hope, well, I don't see it anymore, so it'll be fine? What happens when it gets there? Will it affect other biological systems? And perhaps, more importantly, or more effectively, perhaps, why did I even get it to begin with? If I'm going to throw it out, why did I get it? And the important thing here is this, some of this is inevitable, but the pressure on pollution, it's out there. It's out there now. We can all see it. What are we going to do about it? You can do something about it yourself. You can do something about it by putting power on your local societies where you live to deal with it effectively, and with politicians to take it seriously. The COVID epidemic has taught many people many things about politicians, and I hope, and all I can speak of is for the UK at the moment, is that I hope that many of our younger audience who haven't really seen politicians really working on important issues before have learnt lessons to how they work or don't work. Put pressure on politicians, and you can also put pressures on politicians economically. Every time you buy something, that's a vote. You don't have to wait till election time to vote. Every time you buy something, that is a vote for an economic system which helps drive pollution. That's the end. Thank you for listening. I've just got to close this screen and try and get back to where I was. So just bear with me. Right. Stop sharing. Yes, I'm back. Am I back? Oh no, I'm not back.
Yeah, you're back. Thank you so much.
I'm back. Okay. Yes, I'm back. Right.
Yeah, this is Sridhar.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Stuart Milligan, for the wonderful presentation. Now I request Dr. Bulbuli Khonikar, Assistant Professor, Department of Geology, Guwahati University, to carry the interactive session. Over to you, Bulbuli.
Thank you, Dr. Jyotis Mitawa. So first of all, I would like to offer our sincere thanks and gratitude to Professor Stuart Milligan, sir, for offering such a wonderful lecture in a very relevant topic. Sir, your lecture has enriched us with new information as well as help us to conceive new ideas and also ignite our mind to ask some questions on the different aspects of the topic. So you have started with the different pressure, starting from emotional pressure, then the political pressure, and finally the global pressure. So, sir, you have started with the concern of world population that has increased double in 1921, around 7.7, to the man-made the global problems like buildings, plastic, and then you come to the different aspects of the pollution parameter like carbon dioxide level, which has increased up to 50% from pre-industrialization period. Then, sir, you throw light on the antibiotics, and we are using it indiscriminately, and how it passes through different biological chains, and how it impacts on both biotic and abiotic factors, sir. So, definitely, these different aspects of the topic raise some question in our mind, and with due permission of you, sir, I am going to take some of the questions that has been asked in the chat box also. I'm receiving some question in my WhatsApp platform also. First question to you, sir. It is asked by Professor Monidip, sir. He asked that how is carbon dioxide concentration measured over planet Earth? His first question. And his second question is, sir, uh, what is the latest in thing to treat antibiotic resistance? Two questions, sir, for you. One is for how is carbon dioxide concentration measured over planet Earth?
Okay. Um, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to start off before I answer any questions. Actually, I have to say the lecture changed when I was first asked to do it. I thought, yes, that's easy. I will do something because I was given a free choice of what should I talk about. And to be honest, I just thought, I will give something which I find easy and which I know a lot about because that's easy. And it was going to be about, in fact, what I ended up with, which was very short, and that is compounds in the environment which affect our reproduction and developmental systems. So that would have been simple, focused, and I'm sure you'd have learned something. But as I thought about it, and I started looking into pollution, and I thought, this is so important that I'm going to change the lecture. I've always been interested in the human population and the pressures that the human population increase is putting on the planet. And I could have, in fact, I sort of gave a lecture on that last year to some of you. But I thought I'll tackle pollution, and I learned so much actually in tackling this lecture. I have learned so much, a lot of which I haven't given you. So my first apology is going to be this: I'm not an expert on this. I am not an expert on pollution. I'm certainly not an expert on antibiotics, and I've seen some of the questions, and I'm damn sure I'm not going to be able to answer them. But I can see what the problems are, and I've gone to the most recent literature on these problems, and these problems are there; they're not going away. And my concern, frankly, is really it's politicians and the way the world is operating. For CO2, global warming has to be a global response. It's a global problem. It has to be a global response. The only good thing about the changes in the last 30, 40, 50 years, especially in the last 20 years, is we've got global communication now, which allows different countries and different political systems to communicate with each other very quickly. People see it as a global problem, and people are putting more and more pressures on the global politicians to get their act together. But the trouble is with politicians, they have in democratic societies, their allegiance is to their populace, who's electing them, and the people who elect them tend to be have a self-interest which does not necessarily marry the self-interest of the planet. And what we need to do is, just like COVID, we need to really persuade people that really we need to act now. It's no good just thinking it's all going to go away. It's not. It's there. It's going to get worse. And I quoted the leaked report from the IPCC, which came out today, saying really we're in a course for disaster because people will just not look. And the question is, who's going to listen? Are politicians going to listen? In the UK, there will be a conference, the COP, I can't remember which it is, COP22, in November in Glasgow, where people will come together to talk about climate change. It's the action which has to occur. So let me go back now. I will answer a question with a proviso is don't expect an expert answer. Okay?
Okay, sir. Okay. The next question is next
No,
question.
let me. The question first one was how do you measure CO2 in the atmosphere? My understanding, and I have actually looked up this question. It comes from you can do lots of measurements around the globe. So it depends. if you go on to Google and you put in global CO2 levels, you get different pictures. They're all, or different values. They're all slightly different. Why? Is because they've taken the CO2 measured in Australia, India, and they put that together and average them. There's a very nice one which is done on Hawaii, which just measures it daily. You can look on the Google, and you can look at the hourly changes in CO2 levels in Hawaii. Now, why choose Hawaii? Because Hawaii is in the middle of an ocean, and it's a mixture of all the things which are happening around it, and you can just see that each day it goes up and up and up and up, I'm afraid. So how you measure it, it's easy to measure individually. Get a figure, well, plus or minus a bit, doesn't matter, it's going up. I can't remember what the second question was, sorry.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question I'm going to take from Professor Dhiran Kumar Sharma, sir. Sir is asking, can the synthetic zinc be a cause for pollution pressure? I repeat, can the synthetic zinc be a cause for pollution pressure?
Okay, I'm sorry, actually, the synthetic what?
Synthetic zinc, sir. Synthetic zinc.
Vein.
Synthetic zinc, yeah.
I'm not sure if I understand the question, I'm sorry. Can somebody help me?
Yeah. Can
So the synthetic genes is talking about.
Oh, synthetic gene.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Gene.
Just can I help you, Milligan?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, sir.
do.
Yes, sir is here. Yeah.
Anyone, I'll be
Yeah,
grateful.
I know. I do not have the answer, but I am the questioner. Synthetic zinc is made from the chemicals now. It is not a natural product, absolutely based upon the synthetic chemicals. So my question, under the head of synthetic chemicals, can the synthetic zinc could cause a pressure upon the pollution of the earth? The answer I do not know. Still, I could not find anything. Since you have done a lot of work on the pollution pressure, it ignites my mind to ask this question.
Okay, that's a challenge for everybody then. I think the problem is with all chemicals that anything is different. They each have your own individual characteristics, physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, and how anything interacts with it, whether it's biotic or the abiotic environment, whether it's the ultraviolet light or whether it's heat, will differ. And that's one of the problems with anything synthetic. The trouble is we design things to be long lasting. Because that's brilliant. If you design something that's long lasting, you've got a product which you can sell and it'll go everywhere. But if you don't know what's going to happen to it and you don't know what consequence it might have, that's a worry. But I'm really not saying we should get away with, we should abolish all synthetic chemicals. What I'm saying is we need to control these things. We need to actually think about what we're doing. And we shouldn't just take our plastic bottles and just chuck them somewhere and think that somebody else is going to deal with the problem. This is a good example. The cap is coloured. Why? Why do we need to have pigment in there? Why? The plastic here is different from the plastic there because you need them of different properties. So you have different additives. This isn't as easily recycled as that. So what we need is a very, and for the young people here, if you, the planet is going to depend on people who understand waste management, especially hazardous waste management. It's a huge, I would say, void of expertise, which needs to be filled by people to deal with it. What we really must do is to focus back on selective use of things, and then having used them, keeping them and not just throwing them away and thinking it's out of sight, out of mind. It's not. Sorry, that's...
Okay, thank you very much. Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to take another question asked by Vishek Datta. Sir, question to you is, can development and sustainability go hand in hand, especially in developing countries that are trying to catch up to the developed ones? Also, is it possible for capitalism economy to bring about the transformation to reverse the ecological damage?
Woo. Yes, I'm not a politician either. Okay, but let's deal with the second one first. Capitalism, can it reward, or can it deal with the problem by rewarding? Yes, of course it can, because it depends what if you decide to value something like Bitcoin. I mean, what's the value of Bitcoin? You know, apart from generating loads of CO2, I mean, there's it's an abstract thing, but people have valued it. So if you value getting rid of things, if you pay people to do it, yeah, capitalism will work. The problem is capitalism has also got to stop the production of the things to begin with. I don't see so much of an issue there, especially as, frankly, I think you have to live with it. Capitalism is on the planet, and it's not going to be a system we're going to get rid of, because many societies are based on capitalism. So what we've got to do is to make politicians make their own societies reward what we want to achieve. Now, the first one, development and sustainability, can they go hand in hand? Yeah. Again, if they, there's no reason why they shouldn't. And it'd be, humans are remarkably resourceful, and we've achieved so much. I think it would be defeatist to say they can't go hand in hand. They should go hand in hand, and it should be for society to actually make sure they do go hand in hand. But again, it's just like dealing with COVID here. If you can support people to do the right thing and to self-isolate, they'll do it. If you can support people to not spread the disease by wearing masks, fine. If you penalise people, then that's a different threat which doesn't go down well. If you penalise people for not self-isolating, that is not the same as rewarding people for self-isolation. So we've had a lot of problems with a government here which tends to not have rewarded people and supported people to do the right thing. There's been just threats of, if you don't do this, you'll get fined. If you don't do this, this will happen. Not explaining things, not education enough. What we need with pollution and the population and climate change is education. And education in politicians would be helpful as well. So I don't know if we've got any politicians in the audience. Anyone? But what we need a scientifically educated set of politicians, and that's not saying that everyone has to be scientists. It's just saying that I don't believe there are enough to actually weigh up and understand the scientific argument. We've had a very to deal with the COVID situation in the UK. We've had a group of scientists who advised the UK, who advised the UK government, but their advice was largely, and still at least partly, has been secret. We haven't known what they've said. So another group of scientists has actually set themselves up as independent group of scientists, which publicise each week what is going on, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, the data, puts it out on YouTube. You can interact with them. Journalists interact with them. That's open. That really is open communities where we're trying to get together to drive things forward positively, not in a negative way. If you just penalise people for pollution, that doesn't help. You've got to support people to not pollute in the first place.
Sir, another question for you. Can we popular the use of biological control agent instead of using the other pesticides or herbicides? Can we popular the use of biological control agent instead of using the other pesticides or herbicides? Sir.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. For biological control, it can be very good. But it also can be a complete disaster unless you understand the biological system into which you're introducing whatever the control mechanism is. So that is why there's, for many countries, Australia is a good example because it's completely surrounded by water. It has a very strong legislation to prevent foreign species coming in because the devastation that foreign species can cause in an uncontrolled way. If you really understand the system, then biological control can work. By introducing things like sterilized mosquitoes into a population so they stop mosquitoes breeding, brilliant. Lovely idea.
Thank you, sir. We can take one or two questions further. So one question from Tasrin Shirin. She is asking, antimicrobial peptides are one of the promising alternatives to replace the conventional antibiotics. Considering their remarkable properties, it is assumed that resistance is unlikely to occur against them. Sir, can we hope that antimicrobial peptides can replace antibiotics for future use?
Okay. I've read a tiny bit about this, and the answer to the first bit, I'm sure, is yes, that antimicrobial peptides might be very effective. The second bit is as long as you understand what happens to them after you've used them in your body. And I don't know enough about that to know whether they, in fact, get broken down very quickly, don't sit around, and will not disturb microbial networks in the environment.
Okay,
So
sir.
the answer is I don't really know, but possibly. But we go back to capitalism. There's and politics because of it. There's vast amounts of money in antibiotics, and people, if you can make money from something, people will go on selling it, I'm afraid. I think.
Last question.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
No.
Last question I'm going to take because of time constraint. The question is from Haswat Bara. With the rising population, the need for food is utmost. What could be some sustainable methods of farming with high output and minimal wastage in underdeveloped and developing countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. Always when people talk about population and food supply, there's a concern about what's happening. That is accentuated, I'm afraid. I'm going to diverge slightly from the question. I'm going to try and come back to it. By things like climate change, where climate change can devastate a country's ability to feed its population because of the crops which are destroyed. Last year in Africa, in some parts of Africa, I think it was last year, huge locust plagues were going through. All you need is a failure of the wheat harvest in some parts of the world, and again you've got problems. So it isn't just how much food you can produce, it's the additional pressures on it. And now my mind has suddenly gone blank. There's another one I try and think what I was going to say. Another issue is there is an enormous amount of waste in terms of food. food supply, food use, and I'm sure that the statistics are well over a third, if not well over a third, of all food use is just wasted, doesn't actually go anywhere. So you could make things more efficient just by itself. The other thing is, yes, you can cut down on or harness more directly. What you're trying to do with food is to take energy which initially came from the sun and went into plants, and use it for your own bodies as food. So why feed it to animals, put it up the food chain that way? Because that is a waste. So getting rid of reducing the amounts of livestock is obviously an easy one, whereby you take many more, much more of the sun's energy and put it into food crops that you actually could use.
Thank you very much, sir. Because of time constraints, we are sorry that all other questions we cannot take in this platform, but definitely we'll forward all the questions to sir email, and further also we can make some academic conversation with you, sir. So always this interaction makes teaching learning process effective. Thank you very much, sir, for your deliberation, and also reminding us that worst is yet to come. So you have given us a warning signal. Thank you very much.
But don't forget it. Don't forget
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Next time you throw something away, think about it.
yeah. In context of pollution and all the problems. Okay, sir. Thank you very much. And with this, I'd like to hand over the session to Dr. Judismita Das. Over to you, Dr. Judismita Das, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bulbuli Khunigar. Thank you so much. We are very fortunate that Professor Arun Kumar Burwa of Iowa State University, USA, an eminent scientist and guide of Professor Umesh Chandra Goswami, actually gave his consent to attend the talk, but maybe due to poor network connectivity, he could not make it possible. Thank you so much, sir. We are again thankful to Dr. Dibakar Goswami from US, Professor Umesh Goswami sir's younger brother, who had joined the meeting actually. He's still now with us. It is 3:30 a.m. for him, and he has still joined the memorable lecture. Thank you so much, sir. Now, may I request Professor Jogen Chandra Kolita, Head Department of Zoology, Guwahati University, to offer his speech. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jyotismita. Esteemed chief guest, Professor Stuart Milligan. As you have already mentioned, he was my guide in London, King's College London, University of London. Also, we did work together. That was my postdoctoral work. I am very happy to see the family members of a great professor who taught us, Professor U.C. Goswami, daughter Amrita, who spoke the words about Professor Goswami sir, is all esteemed relatives and friends, Madam Dr. Rita Goswami, our esteemed members from Rotary Club, who have been joining together in this great occasion to pay our deepest tribute to a great teacher who was the great motivator. He inspired many of us, as Dr. Namita Sharma has mentioned. Our faculty members present from the Department of Zoology, as well as from other faculties of Guwahati University, and about 600 colleges of Assam. We are delighted to see that many of the distinguished guests and well-wishers of Professor Goswami are joining together, though they are very busy, from different parts of the world. As you have already mentioned, Professor Arun Kumar Borua, Professor Goswami's PhD guide, main motivator, and also Professor Goswami's younger brother, Dr. Dibakar Goswami, and many other friends, mainly young scholars and our student friends. As we are offering our deepest tribute to Professor Goswami sir this year on the exact date of his death 6 years before. Last year, we were very unhappy. We could not organize this particular memorial lecture because of the pandemic. As all of us we know, pandemic is very stressful. And we are blessed today by Professor Milligan, who immediately consented when I contacted only few days back that Professor Milligan, my teacher, who was the great motivator, we lost him. Can you offer tribute with a oration? Then immediately he said, okay, Zugan, I am ready. You go ahead. Immediately I informed our president of JJC, working president of JJC, and also Dr. Rita ma'am and Dr. Namita Sharma, very active members of the memorial committee, and all my research scholar friends, and like Jyotish Mita from faculty members of other institutions around us. We are blessed by all of you. As Professor Milligan has narrated the story, and Bulbuli has rightly said, yes, the worst is yet to come as far as pollution is concerned. And also the galaxy of people who are putting questions, queries, including my own professor, Professor D.K. Sharma. I could see many of you respected professors who contributed to knowledge and who created many of us to see the world and to work with great professor like Professor Stuart Milligan. I offer gratitude to you, Professor Milligan, on behalf of organizing committee, on behalf of great institution, Guwahati University, we offer our gratitude and our congratulations to all of you. And I hope that in course of time, we will be able to discuss many more vital issues together with you. And finally, I thank all of you. I do not want to name our organizing committee members, but I am grateful to all of you for your very, very hard work. I could understand that last night many of you were preparing and you could not sleep even. Thank you so much and namaskar to all. Namaskar to family members of Professor Milligan and my respected Professor Yusuf Goswami, family and friends.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, moving forward, I would now like to request Shri Priyabrata Lahkar sir, who's the president of Zoological Society of Assam, to enlighten us with a few words. Sir?
Thank you, Judismita. At the very outset, I'd like to offer my thanks and gratitude to Professor Stuart Milligan, who really gave a very, very nice talk and make us all aware of the future happenings. What will happen in our future, the worst will come. That awareness you are kindling in our brain. All the faculty members, all the research scholars, all the listeners who have listened to you very patiently are really thinking. It will give us a thought-provoking lecture so that we will be aware much about the future to come about our pollution, about our environment, about the art where we are living. I really thank all the members, family members of Professor Umesh Goswami, a very renowned teacher as well as scientist who make a niche in the scientific research domain of the world. And he has traveled so many places of the world for research work on vitamin A and other things. I thank all the members, particularly his elder brother, Professor Anil Goswami, Anil Goswami's wife, Dr. Uh, Olaga Goswami, and Umesh Goswami's daughter, Amrita, and other members who are associated with the family, the memorial committee, Professor Balen Kumar Das, Namita Sharma, and others, and also the Rotarian clubs, Rotarian members of West Guwahati, who have come forward to organize this memorial lecture very nicely, and indeed is a really worth mentioning event of today's situation. Thank you very much for organizing and making me part of this. Thank you very much and namaskar to all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, respected teachers, dignitaries, research scholars, and students for being present here and to make this event a memorable one. Now, coming to the most important part, may I request Mrs. Priyanka Kashyap, research scholar, Department of Zoology, Guwahati University, to offer formal vote of thanks. But before going to Priyanka, just I want to mention that feedback link will be given after offering vote of thanks, which will be valid only for 20 minutes. Over to you, Priyanka.
Priyanka, you have network problem.
You are not audible, Priyanka.
Priyanka has a network problem, I think.
Sir, am I audible now?
Yeah, now
Yes.
Yeah,
it's
you're
audible.
audible now.
Yes, without
carry on, please
microphone,
carry
you are
on.
audible. Yeah.
Okay. So, a very good afternoon to all the respected members present here today. It was indeed an inspiring and motivating session. On behalf of organizing committee, I feel privileged to offer the vote of thanks in the fourth Professor Umesh Chandra Goswami Memorial Lecture on the many powerful pressure on pollution. At the very beginning, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our honorable chief guest cum speaker, Professor Stuart Ricard Milligan, visiting professor of reproductive biology, King's College London, University of London, for giving his valuable time and gracing today's memorial lecture with his enlightening words. I'm sure all of us are motivated from today's session. Looking forward for more of your motivational talks in the future. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful session. I would like to convey my special thanks to our eminent guest and Professor Arun Kumar Barua, retired faculty at Iowa State University, USA, for his presence. Next, I would like to thank our esteemed guest of honor, Dr. Namita Sharma ma'am, Associate Professor of Department of Zoology, D.K. Mirza College, for her gracious presence and her beautiful words. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm also very much thankful to our respected invitees. I would like to thank Ms. Amrita Goswami for her presence and valuable speech. Thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to thank Dr. Dibakar Goswami from USA for his presence and enlightening today's occasion. I am very much thankful to respected Sri Priyabrata Lokar sir, President of Zoological Society of Assam, and Dr. Bolendra Kumar Das sir, Working President of Zoological Society of Assam, for being here today and who have always been so encouraging and supportive every time. I would like to express my profound gratitude to Head of the Department of Zoology, Gauhati University, and General Secretary of Zoological Society of Assam, Professor Jogen Chandra Kolita sir, for his constant encouragement and support, and without whom this event would not have been possible. And I'm sure under your guidance, we will achieve great heights in the coming years. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to thank Ms. Tribeni Bujarborua of MSc 4th semester, Department of Zoology, Gauhati University, for her beautiful performance in today's program. Also, I would like to thank our joint coordinators, Dr. Bulbuli Khonikar Madam, Assistant Professor of Zoology, Gauhati University, Dr. Jyotishmita Das Madam, Assistant Professor of Zoology, Nagaon College Autonomous, and member of the organizing committee, Gayatri Hazarika, Juganta Jyoti Das, Sankranti Devi, Hirak Jyoti Kalita, Rajarshi Deka, Kamal Adhikari, Keshav Jyoti Bora, Sanjana Sharmin, members of Professor U.C. Goswami Memorial Committee, all the RS of the Research Scholar Forum, Department of Zoology, Gauhati University, and the members of Zoological Society of Assam
for their constant hard work in making this Professor Umesh Chandra Goswami Memorial Lecture a grand success. Finally, I would like to thank all the invitees and participants from various organizations and institutions for attending this memorial lecture. Thank you so much for cordial cooperation. My sincere apologies if I have missed out any names. Once again, I thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priyanka.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
also want to thank family members of Professor Umesh Chandra Goswami and his wife, Dr. Rita Goswami, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being with us today. Now I request Gayatri Hazarika to carry over the next session. Over to you, Gayatri.
We have almost come to the end of this wonderful session. And at end, I would like to request Ms. Sankranti Devi, who's a research scholar of the Department of Zoology, to end this formal session with a prayer.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. As we have come to the end of such a beautiful program, I would like to close this session with the Shanti Mantra. Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu. Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu. Sarvesham Punam Bhavatu. Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah. Sarve Santu Niramaya. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Ma Kashit Dukh Bhag Bhave. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I wish that may peace prevail in the world, with everyone being free from all diseases, and may the world heal. With this, I formally declare the end of today's beautiful session. Thank you, each and everyone, for cooperating and your patience. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. And namaskar. Stuart, thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Namaskar to you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Then we will meet again.
Thank you very much, everyone. It will be a great pleasure to meet you all again. Thank you. Namaskar.
আজি বহুত পুৰণি মানুহবিলাক দেখা পালো আজি
Yeah, very nice.
Old Guards of Zoology Society of Assam.
Yeah.
Soon as